John McMullen, who typically you hear at 4 o'clock on the Boardwalk on the Hotline, had some shuffling to do. He was kind enough to join us here on the Sports Bash. You're like Cal Ripken. We've never missed a day.
Yeah, I still haven't missed a day, but the Eagles sprung assistant coaches on us who rarely talk, so you can't miss that kind of stuff. So they sprung it on us last minute.
All right, well, let's number one. I want to get into Jason Peters. You wrote about him at 97.3 ESPN.com, that he's likely to miss some time, which means not season-ending, but he is going to miss a couple of games?
Yeah, I mean, that's not official yet. About a biceps tear, and there's two kinds. One would obviously require surgery and would be a season ender. And really, if you think about where Jason is in his career, that could be a career ender. So it was the best case scenario for the Eagles, but it's still an injury. And a pretty significant one for a guy who needs his strength to push people around. So if you think about the schedule and the fact that you have Carolina, then you're in London against Jacksonville, it sure makes a lot of sense that he'll come back after the bye.
I want to ask you about moving forward with him potentially being out. I guess Vaitai is the guy. Does that make – you wrote about trade needs today. We'll get into that. Does that make offensive line a priority in this in the trades, looking at trades, or do they like what they have within?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I think it would be a priority, but the reality is, and I kind of wrote that on 973ESPN.com, there's probably not 32 good left tackles in this league. There's a lot of teams rolling out left tackles that probably shouldn't be playing, to be honest. So when you talk about trades, that's not a position where you're going to have guys on the market that are better than Big V. So I think from the Eagles' perspective, they look at it as they have one of the better swing tackles in football, but would you like somebody better than that? Yeah, you probably would, but you're not going to get them at this stage of the year. There just are no left tackles.
John, when you look at trade needs, you list outside, this is order of importance, speed receiver, defensive tackle, which I think is an interesting one, because does that indicate that Jernigan might not be back? You also list offensive tackle, which we just went over, running back, which was all the rage a week ago, and secondary. So let's kind of look at each one here for real quick. Speed receiver, that's kind of hard to find at this stage at this junction of the season.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think it is. I really don't, because I don't want somebody who's going to be impactful as far as catching the football. I just want somebody that can scare the opposing defense with his speed and his ability to stretch the field, open things up for the guys underneath. Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar, Zach Ertz, even Dallas Goedert. Eagles have a lot of weapons in the intermediate zones. What they don't have is that Mike Wallace, even Matt Collins, I would love to have back, and maybe he can come back off injured reserve. And I've advocated throwing Shelton Gibson out there just because he can run. Mm-hmm. What we're looking for at this stage, and you've talked about it a lot, is what Torrey Smith gave him, which I got news for you. It wasn't much, but he could run, and you had to respect that. And the Eagles don't have that right now.
No question. Yeah, that's something that they brought Mike Wallace in here because I think they thought it was an upgrade to Smith, and him and Wentz never got a chance to play with each other. Is Wallace completely done?
Well, I would think so. You can bring two guys back. I think it's much more likely that Matt Collins would be the receiver coming back off injured reserve. He fractured his fibula. From a time standpoint, yeah, he could be back before week 17. So that's sort of like a different decision. Do you want to wait for him, or is the need so great you have to go fill it elsewhere, whether that's bringing Matt Collins back, whether that's trading outside the organization?
Yeah.
So I think other decisions will kind of define whether Mike has a chance to be back, because if you get somewhere else,
yeah,
or you do bring a Mac Hollins back and put him in that role, then I think it's kind of a fait accompli that Mike's going to spend the entire year on injured reserve.
John, Glazier reported over the weekend that the Raiders would be interested in Amari Cooper or Carl Joseph, two spots that the Eagles might have some interest, receiver and safety. Would Howie be wise to make a call to Oakland?
Well, I mean, make a call, do your due diligence. I don't have a problem with that. I don't see a great fit. Talking to Malcolm Jenkins today about Avonte Maddox moving back to safety, and he flat out admitted, you know, we don't really need a physical presence back there anymore because we're not allowed to do a lot of that stuff. And that's why I thought Jim Schwartz made an interesting, and after I thought about it, a good decision by moving Avonte Maddox back there. And I think he held his own. I'm not saying he was great, but I think he's done some good things. Now, the issue becomes now you have other injuries as well. Corey Graham and Sidney Jones both down with the hamstring. So at least for the short term, you have some issues. But as I pointed out, hamstrings aren't ACLs. Those guys will be back. And if those guys are back relatively soon, I don't think the need is that great, because I think you have enough depth with Rasul Douglas and his ability to move around. I'm not sure that a guy like Joseph would make sense. Cooper is a big name. I talk about it a lot. Everybody wants Le'Veon Bell. They probably want LaShawn McCoy and they probably want all three because they recognize his name. He doesn't catch the football consistently, and he's not really the deep threat. So where's he going to play? Mm-hmm. I don't think he's fit for this team.
John McMullen with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. When you watch Dallas pound Jacksonville and Washington get a hard-fought win at home, which one of those two teams is more of a threat to Philly in your mind?
I think Washington's still the better team. Although I will say this about Dallas, and I said it earlier this year, things have kind of shifted in Big D, and the fact that defense is now the strength of their team. And it's a pretty good defense. And they have some good players. And a guy like Jalen Smith, who they took in the second round when he had that horrific knee injury, you're talking about a guy who would have been a top 5 pick in the draft. And they waited around, similar to what the Eagles did with Sidney Jones. And now they're sort of reaping the benefits of it. Sean Lee can never get on the field. When he is on the field, he's great. But they drafted Kyle Van Der Esch as well. They have a great defensive line. And, all of a sudden, guys like Byron Jones in the defensive backfield are playing really well. So they have a good defense. And if they can play offense the way they did against Jacksonville, and I don't mean the efficacy, I mean the way they played, and use Dak Prescott as more of a zone read quarterback, all of a sudden they might be on to something. Now, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that consistently, because if you do that consistently, your quarterback is going to get beat up. So they have some interesting ways they can go to try to be a playoff team, but I just think Washington is more well-rounded.
They play this weekend, and we'll see. That should be a fun one. Philly's got Carolina. We'll have plenty more on that game throughout the week here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. I like somebody tried to slip a question into to Schwartz today about Mills and if they would use him on the inside, and I guess Schwartz did go for the bait, and he said, yeah, in like an emergency situation. In other words, no, we're not moving him. He's staying outside, so shut your traps.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Jim likes Jalen Mills. Jim thinks a lot more of Jalen Mills than most of the fan base does. Remember, if you go back to when Ronald Darby got hurt last year early in the season, remember before that dislocated ankle against Washington,
Yeah.
Ronald Darby was playing left corner, and Jalen was on the right side. Now, typically your best corner is the left corner because most offenses are right-handed, right-handed quarterbacks. So you put your best guy on the left side. They were forced to move Jalen Mills. And when Ronald finally came back, they didn't move Jalen. Now, he had a much better season last year, but it kind of tells you what Jim Schwartz thinks about him. He always talks about, look at the numbers in this league and the points being scored. I joked about the Big 12 championship game last night on Sunday night. Just offenses go up and down the field, and for some reason, Philadelphia doesn't recognize that this happens to everybody. And you know, what Jim likes about Jalen Mills, and it was actually Corey Unlin today who brought this up. When you go back to that Minnesota game, and he gives up that huge play to Adam Thielen. And by the way, look at that guy's numbers every week. It's not just the Eagles. Remember what happened? The Vikings got down to the red zone, and who made the two plays in the red zone to keep him out of the end zone? It was Jalen Mills. And he forgot, and that's what you have to do if you're a cornerback in this league. You're going to get burnt by receivers like that. And you got to be able to forget about it and move immediately on to the next play and keep doing your job.
Yeah.
And Jim Schwartz loves that about Jalen Mills.
All right, should be an interesting week. Carolina's in town, Dallas and New York. Dallas and Washington go head-to-head. And we'll see both those games on 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen will be back tomorrow, of course, as we get you ready for the Eagles and Panthers right here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.